PJNet team. Our bumper's rolling. We're recording to present this to you at this time. We'll start the countdown to Studio 8. Well, good evening and welcome to PJNet.tv. What a special evening this is. Why do I say that? Well, I don't know. Because we have partnered with vinewords.net, who has some 16 contributing team members. Each of those members has agreed to come on our program and share with us, and some of them are recorded so that they could be on standby for occasions where, well, things must have happened. Something happened tonight. So we're bringing you this special treasure that we have had archived under the lid, but we are going to let the genie out of the bottle. I want to introduce to you Irene Wintermyer of the vinewords.net team. Irene, thank you for making arrangements to do this. It's so wonderful to always have a plan B. But I guess you're kind of a planner, because I was reading through your bio, and you've got quite the resume in the medical profession, as well as some educational credentials. Were you a book nerd coming up? Were you one of those nerd types?
No, actually, I wasn't. That didn't develop until later on in life.
Okay. Well, what drove you? I mean, you have made something. You've been hospital administration. Tell us about yourself. You have an amazing resume.
Well, when I was probably in my early 20s, I had the desire to go into the medical profession, and I worked as a unit clerk back then and got to see all the different professional staff, from nursing to doctors to orderly, nursing aides, and I decided that I wanted to be a part of that in more of a hands-on type of aspect than I was just as a secretary. So I decided to go to school to become a physician assistant, and after completing that, I thought it probably is a good idea, because I wasn't sure if I was going to continue to always be a clinical person, that it's also a good idea to have head knowledge as far as business. So I continued my education to go on to get an MBA. And then the opportunities just came around where I was able to get into leadership positions. And that's how that all started.
So you got to see there's, all enterprises, all business, there's several different faces. The forward-facing business, when I go to the hospital, you see the caregivers, you see the doctors, you see the output. But behind that, there's another layer. You've gotten to work the business side of it as well as the caregiver side. Did it
Correct.
disappoint you when you found out how bad? Were your eyes open to some things that shocked you?
Well, I think as a clinician, I saw a lot of potential opportunities for change. And really, the only way that you can be involved in change is to get into a position where you have a voice, where your voice will be heard. And one of the reasons why I wanted to go into administration.
And how long were you in that capacity?
I started in leadership positions, probably, which ended up in a director level for 10 years.
10 years? Okay.
Yeah.
If we were to turn the clock back a few years, what do you think the chances would be that you could land in that position as a female?
Um, in the hospital setting, there's a lot of women who are in leadership positions because of nursing.
Okay.
So I think that it's a little bit different than in the typical business world.
Did you feel you were up to it? I mean, you sound like you were pretty drawn to this. What was driving that? You could have just done your job.
Well, I could have, but I have a passion for people, but that doesn't only include those who were patients, but also for the caregivers themselves, because we're so busy taking care of patients that often the caregiver themselves are overlooked, and they need people to focus on them and to make their work-life balance tolerable, because it is a difficult role.
Well, you kind of you did that, and you went so far. You don't look old enough to be retired. When did you get this urge to branch out into education?
I I actually started my education right around the age of 30. Um, and I think I've just aged well. Now I am an early retiree, but not by that many years.
Okay. Well, where did your walk with Christ fit into all of this puzzle? Because you've done a lot of good things and you've done well for yourself. And a lot of times when people are pursuing that professional ambition is almost a different path than a walk with Christ sometimes. Where did you meet Christ?
I met Christ early on, before my education even started. So, I was a born again believer. Um, I was in my mid 20s at that time. And I think it really was the desire that God put within me to pursue the opportunities that I have. Because obviously, when you look back on your life and you wonder how you got from point A to point B, a lot of steps have to take place in order for you to get there. And I just think that, that was a different season, a different journey to get me to the next step.
In working with caregivers, I know some doctors, nurses, and they're very well learned in the science and the biology, and sometimes along with that learning comes a very secular or humanistic, to the exclusion of God. How spiritually deep were some of the people you worked with, and how spiritually shallow were some of the people you worked with?
Wow, that's kind of it's a good question. I, in my personal experience, there were some who were um, very, I guess, spiritual. But in the later part of my career, I worked as part of a Catholic hospital system. So, praying with patients and talking about God was actually encouraged.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't necessarily have to suppress that part of, my walk with God, my walk with Christ.
Yeah, I consider myself a scientist. I studied social sciences, but I'm also a computer programming and mathematics. So science is a big part of my life, and some of my peers are obviously going to be similar. But there are many that are scientific to the exclusion of God. They think of science as the answer and the truth and the scientific method, and they subscribe to these secular and almost pagan notions. And sometimes they're surprised that that I'm a Christian and that I'm spiritual, and think they cannot reconcile in their mind science and religion. You ever
Yeah,
feel you
I,
ever witness that struggle?
yeah, I have a lot of friends who are physicians, and I see that within them. They can't see or they choose not to see the spiritual side of of healing, or even the miracles that God has done, and how those miracles are still being done today. They all they know how to do is to treat with the knowledge that they have, with the medications that are out there. And so it does become a bit of a challenge to have that separation.
One of the most profound things I have ever seen was actually, I think it was on MASH, the TV show. It might have been somewhere else, but a profound sign outside of that surgical tent unit out there in the field. You know, we treat, but God heals.
Mm.
And I'm amazed. I'm also have been a personal trainer, and you learn all the all the physical stuff. We think of the human body as a complex systems of pulleys and levers, and things like that. But what an engineer God is. And it's hard for me to understand when I talk to some of these people. How can you be so stupid? Birthing a child, this is a miracle. You can't possibly explain this, but they try, and they see death. They're obviously forced to see mortality.
Right.
And it they are perplexed about me as I am about them. I cannot understand how they cannot see God. And they think I'm just obsessed with a fantasy of some, I don't know. But that debate, I think, has been going on for a few thousand years. I doubt that we'll solve it tonight. Irene, your formative years, your growing up years, what were those like?
I grew up in a military family. Luckily, I am one of six, so we had enough company. My sisters that I was close with, and because we moved from place to place. Very disciplined lifestyle when you grow up with an Army sergeant.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I have to say more than that.
Well, okay, so where do you fit church and religion and Christianity? Where does that fit in your formative years? Were you raised up in the church that you are in today, or did you wander along a path finding your way?
Well, I went to Catholic school and catechism, but my mother was a Buddhist, so I attended Buddhist meetings with her as well. So I basically grew up believing that God just takes different forms, just from my lack of understanding these other world religions. Okay,
yeah, those are very competing worldviews. They're really not reconcilable. So you're being, I don't want to use the word indoctrination, but I can't think of a better one. You're being raised up onto, you've got one foot on this track and one foot on this track. Mm-hmm. Somewhere down the road, you had to come to some realization that you had to make a decision to go this way or that way.
Well, I always believed in God. And I think just from my education in the Catholic school, and then it really wasn't until God put a calling on my heart that I truly understood who He is, who He was, and who He is not.
So you've got parents of two different religions. How was their relationship? Did that impact their relationship and impact your upbringing?
Not that I was aware of. Although my father grew up Catholic, he was never a churchgoer. So I think it was only Catholic by name.
Okay.
And, my mother, she would go to the meetings, and she had her shrine in the house, and we'd see her during her prayer time, but after a while that kind of died down. And so
when it got on your mind, your heart, to write, predictably you said, well, I need to learn all about it. So you began another educational journey in learning the art and craft of writing.
Yeah, when I was still working full time, I actually started um, writing stories. Like, ideas would just come to my mind, and I just started, putting words on the paper. But then after a time, it was difficult for me to go back and um, to add on, or even have the mental capacity to further my writing skills. And um, so when I got to a point after I retired where I could actually start focusing on it, I saved all those short stories that I'd done over a decade and was able to start compiling them and working on them. And then I had the freedom to learn, which um, was very critical to my writing, because for those people who aren't familiar with what's required, you can't write how you talk. So there definitely is a skill and an art to being able to do that.
That's why I don't write, Irene.
So,
And I took a moment to browse your website, thefaithfulpen.com. And I was kind of intrigued because I can see that you are writing with some regularity. And I just wonder, do things just happen in your life and you say, that inspires me to write a story? Or do you say, I need to write a story, let me go seek inspiration for that story? Which way does it go, or does it a little bit of both?
I think it's more inspiration. Um, I because God has given me such a diverse background and diverse history, and they weren't without trials and tribulations, that I just get inspired, and then I'm able to sit down and write. I do feel sometimes that I have an idea that I'd like to write about, but I'm not always inspired with words. And I think that in order for readers to really want to feel the depth of what your heart is trying to say, the words have to come from inspiration from God and not yourself.
So, if I understand you right, you're saying that you get an inspiration, but there's a gestation period before that sprouts and springs forth in the what we find in the written word on your website. Is there a latency there, a gestation period? And if there is, well, how long is that usually?
It's so variable, Mark, because, there are times I'll just take a walk in the morning, and um, I'm inspired, and I come home and I write, and I can post something within a couple days.
Hmm.
But then there's times where I get inspired and I write, and I'm not feeling the words that I necessarily use. So I sit on it and I just mull over it, and eventually, the words come.
So you're telling me that even on the fast track, you're looking at a couple of days between inspiration and finished product. Is that about right?
Well, yeah, and that's kind of a rule I set for myself. And I think it's more so because I'm a perfectionist, and I want to, once I write something, I want to be able to sit on it and just kind of dwell on it a little bit, and then go back and reread what I wrote to see if I believe it's saying what is I intended it to say.
Irene, earlier you used a phrase that really struck me as odd. You said, through all the trials and tribulations. And everything that I have seen, your life has been one meteoric success after another. And I find it hard to believe that there were trials and tribulations along the way.
I've had a lot of successes, and I'm very thankful for it. But where there's success, there's higher levels of responsibility, and that to go without consequences. It's I love what I did, and I can honestly say I wouldn't want to turn back time and change anything, because every struggle I've been through, I've learned something to propel me a little bit forward. Um, but there were enough tough times to to be able to write a list and be able to help people who might be going through similar struggles.
Well, I'm glad you shared that, Irene, because sometimes as spectators, as bystanders, we cast our gaze upon the success of others. It can happen in sports, in the business world, in the writing world, whatever discipline you look at. There's going to be these people who rise to the top, and you say, I want to be like them. Well, of course, you're seeing the end result, but there's a couple of things that do not factor into that equation initially. First of all, for every one that got there, there's a bunch that did not, that tried very hard. So there's a process. You're not, that is not guaranteed. The other thing is, and this is what you mentioned that I think is so important, you don't know the price. Everybody wants the prize, but not everybody
Right.
wants to pay the price. Did you ever along the way consider the cost and have to answer the question, is this really worth it?
Well, I think I did right before I retired.
So you said, no, it's not. I quit.
No, I think that, God puts you through different seasons in life for a reason. And that was just my season to retire. But I do think that you question it. It really doesn't matter what type of a prestigious title you have, or how big your paychecks are. The bottom line is, where's God putting the passion in your heart? Where is that purpose leading you, down what road? And when you get to a point where um, God moves your passion from one place to another, then you have to
You go with the flow.
follow.
That's
Yeah,
right.
you have to follow.
Well, Irene, I have been so captured by your story. I have neglected the time, and we're gone a little bit over. So I hate that we have to wrap it up. But Irene, thank you for sharing, and thank you for your contributions to the VineWords.net team. We look forward to seeing those thoughts that now we know took at least 48 hours to put together, and sometimes longer. But thank you so much for sharing. We've enjoyed it, and we just wish the very best and Godspeed to you and all that you do. And you have served to inspire many already. We hope that continues.
Thank you, Mark.
Right. Well, folks, that was Irene Wintermyer, and you are seeing the view from high atop the Eagle's Nest studio, the broadcast facility here at pjnet.tv. Sorry we went a little bit over there, but that was very captivating, don't you? I was fascinated. What a story. Folks, before I leave, I'd like to challenge you with 2 questions to answer to yourself. The first one is, what is the boldest thing that you've ever done for Jesus Christ? And the second question is, well, how long ago was that? Folks, our lives can be a journey that has many detours. It takes boldness to keep moving forward. So I certainly hope that none of us would ever be satisfied with our answer to either of those 2 questions.